And I might just mention while they're being seated, I found myself on a flight a couple of weeks ago seated next to a coach from a small college lacrosse team. And as we chatted about various things, and he pulled up his computer and showed me some of the things he was doing on, I was impressed, maybe even overwhelmed, by the amount of data he had on 150 high school lacrosse players that he was recruiting. And so to me, he became someone that was very proficient in the use of data. And the hope is that we collectively can become more proficient in our use of data. So let's go ahead and introduce our discussants. On the far end, we have Paul Cubbeth, with the Vice President and Community Development Officer with the Federal Reserve Bank in Cleveland. Next to him is James Thompson, Chair and Professor of Finance at the University of Akron. Next to him is John Paturas, CEO of the Akron Community Foundation. Next to him is Fred Wright, President and CEO of the Akron Urban League. Next is Jay Ferran, Senior Vice President of Business Attraction with Team NEO. William Curran, Mayor of the City of Hudson. And Barry Rosenbaum, a Senior Fellow with the University of Akron Research Foundation. So welcome and thank you for coming. And we would encourage and invite comments as we go along. I'll try to monitor to make sure we move along here. But we want this to be a discussion, so let's go ahead and start with our discussants here. And I'm going to start just at this end and move down. So Barry, we're going to put you on first. And why don't you answer this therefore what question, and specifically what are some of the strategic actions that should be taken by the community, and then we'll invite each to give a short response to that particular inquiry. Barry, go ahead.
Is my mic on? Those in the back? Look, thank you. I now can put discussant on my resume. That's a new term. Let me, look, first, I'm an industry guy. So I worked for 35 years with a small company called Exxon Mobil, and I'll take all the credit and all the blame for bringing advanced elastomer systems to Akron, and the blame in that Exxon has chosen to relocate a lot of advanced elastomer systems to Houston. It's my pleasure to work with the University of Akron Research Foundation, and everything that I do 24/7 is to try and create jobs for our graduates based on technology-based economic development, so they're high-paying jobs, Brad. But let me make a comment by telling a little story. We work more and more closely with Arizona State University. They're in Arizona, they're in Tempe, which is in the Phoenix area. And they commented to me that we here in Northeast Ohio have a competitive advantage as a region. What is that competitive advantage in the eyes of Arizona State University? It's our industrial base. We have an industrial base in Northeast Ohio, maybe more broadly in Ohio, to die for. They don't have that in Phoenix. So my comment would be that can we find ways to better engage with our industrial base in Ohio? Because to some extent, they, not me, are creating jobs. We can provide the facilitation, we can provide the processes. I do think that education and innovation and entrepreneurship are very important, but it's our industrial base that hopefully will be hiring more people. And when we talked about various regions in the country, from Las Vegas to Austin and North Carolina and Texas, they're not Northeast Ohio, and they don't have our industrial base. So my comment would be, what can we do to better understand the needs of our unique competitive advantage in this region, which is our industrial base, and do a better job of helping them to grow, hopefully growing in Ohio, to create high-paying quality jobs.
Excellent. Engagement with the industrial sector to do it more efficiently. Mayor Curran, your thoughts.
Thank you very much, and I want to thank everyone for being here today. This is an important conversation and an ongoing conversation. I'd also like to thank the Regional Innovation Institute, the University of Akron, and forever, the Fund for Economic Future, to keep driving this conversation so that we can have policy and have action on those items that are so very important. Underlying this discussion is the factor that was highly illustrated, and that is creation of jobs, but at the same time, in many cases, the addition of inequality. Now, I'm a mayor of a small town, as some people would call it small. When you're in Hudson, it doesn't seem all that small. We're 22,000 plus, and we work with our neighbor communities, but we know, just like individuals, there is significant disparity between our communities here in northeastern Ohio. As the past chairman of the Northeastern Ohio Mayors and City Managers Association, that association endeavored to look and say, on the public side, what do we need to do, what should we be doing to assist the revitalization of northeastern Ohio? And whatever that means as far as revitalization. We look at jobs and we look at economy, and quite frankly, we've had disparity throughout the history of northeastern Ohio, sometimes less than others. And I think during the golden years of the 50s after World War II, there was significant growth in northeastern Ohio, and especially during the war, because of the manufacturing base that we enjoyed here. But at the turn of the 70s, we saw that disparity of those communities taking an inch up. We saw the movement out of our core cities. In Hudson, our exponential growth really took place in the late 80s and 90s, where we saw that we had to and needed to, and our citizens did, merge a township and a village into a city. But our focus is, what do we need to do, is the same thing that has been said time after time, and I go back to those who are in the educational field, is to prepare all of our citizens, but especially our young citizens, to the world that they're going to face in the future. Now, if you go to www.360-public.com and you pick up the public data that's available today here in Ohio, and you look at the demographics of Hudson, you'll see that there is a significant drop-off in our demographics after high school. And then we start gaining back, and then, of course, age-related drop-off. That is not unlike anything that's happening here in northeastern Ohio. We produce many fantastic, educated young individuals that graduate in college. Most of them are going, some of them are here, but a lot of them are going away, and they tend to stay where they go away. So we see that a higher level of collaboration between our educational institutions, as well as a focus on early childhood education on all communities, trying to reduce the disparities between those communities, will have a significant effect on reducing those disparities and moving our economy forward. On top of that, how do we keep them here, or how do we bring them here? And that, of course, is to incentivize or the creation of jobs that we talk about. In Hudson, our data says that 71% of our working adults leave town every day. That's why we endeavor to play our role in the regional approach to answer these very weighty questions. Because if there's not a robust northeastern Ohio, there are no robust communities in the future that are sustainable, and we know that. So my point of view and our point of view, and I can't speak for all of the mayors, and I see some here today, we are doing what we can on the public side to endeavor to put together not only shared services consortiums, and I see Tom Pasquarello is here today, and he's the new executive director of the Northeast of the Summit County, Portage County Shared Services Consortium. But we're also working for a future aspect, and that is to develop, with the proper passage of legislation, an economic development alliance agreement that allows those communities that want to opt in, can opt in, have the vision for the future, understand that collaboration is the key to the future, as the fund has so eloquently stated time and time again, to work together on the public sector side to advance our success ratio versus, of course, working against ourselves. Thank you.
Well said, Mayor. Thank you. Jay.
Great, thank you. Good morning, everyone. No surprise, no single answer here. No surprise, these are going to be tough choices and tough work ahead. But if I was to give you my sense of what we need to do, it falls probably into two buckets. First, we've just got to increase the growth and value of our economy. And what I mean by that is that our driver industries, these are things that we have, you know, they're the hallmark of Northeast Ohio. They have made us what we are. Unfortunately, over time, we did not innovate, we did not create, we did not stay up, and we fell behind. We need to get our driver industries back on a path to at least match the U.S. average. Secondly, we've got to continue to diversify. Emerging clusters are critically important. We have an opportunity, because it's a worldwide jump ball, as I like to say, in these emerging clusters, to win at a disproportionate amount versus other places in the country and around the world. So things like biomedical, advanced energy, water technologies, et cetera. There's a number of them that are coming, and they're going to be good job creators. And then lastly, we've got to create this entrepreneurial environment. We've talked about it. There's a lot of good actions that are being taken, but we've just got to get better and more prolific at it. The second area would be under making Northeast Ohio a place of choice. You have to be able to attract companies, you have to be able to attract people. In order to do that, you've got to be able to demonstrate that you can attract and train workers. We talked earlier that there's going to be nearly 200,000 openings in the next few years, before 2015. We only have 170,000 people that are unemployed, if we went to zero unemployment. And we're not even talking about the shale boom. So we've got to be able to attract people. We've got to develop that next set of workers. We've got to increase the educational attainment. Northeast Ohio, out of the 18 counties that Team NEO works with, only 3 counties have BS, BA degree levels that exceed the national average. 15 do not. We've got to connect and continue to we need to be able to connect our transportation and communication networks. I mean, one of the great things about Northeast Ohio is that you can get to work provided you have a car. I understand the less fortunate have that challenge, and we continually need to look at public transit. So public transit and communication, we've got this great fiber, et cetera. We need to take advantage of that. We've got to strengthen our research and innovation. We've talked already about how driver industries were negatively impacted. We have to work with the universities. We've got to create that allegiance between companies, universities, the public sector, et cetera. We can't let that happen again for our driver industries and for these new emerging clusters. And then lastly, we have to have good public policy. We've got to find a way to foster that. One of the challenges we have in our region is that we've got all these geographical boundaries that we have to deal with, and that's going to probably continue for quite a while. So we have to find a way to work together and transcend that issue. I, in business attraction, have found many of my candidates from states and areas that have not had good public policy. When the governor of Illinois decided to close up his $20 million or $1 billion deficit by raising taxes on business, it made it an opportunity for those businesses to look elsewhere. So it's important.
Thank you, Jay. Good list. Fred Wright.
Thank you. I've been here a little bit over 2 years in Akron, but I've been in an organization called the Urban League for 24 years, and this is my third community. And for the what-if question for me comes down to what are we going to invest in as the economy grows? Who are we going to invest in? Because the reality is, in all three of the communities that I've been in, and then just looking at the fact that the Urban League serves in close to 100 metropolitan areas across the country, there's always communities that seem to be stubbornly left behind when it comes to unemployment, when it comes to certain ethnic, racial, gender backgrounds. They just always are left behind. And I ain't even got to look at the statistics to know African American unemployment is double whatever the white unemployment is. Black males are always either incarcerated, or a high percentage of them are incarcerated, or they are coming back into the community with little to no chance to be able to secure good jobs or good careers. So who are we going to invest in? Because the statistics always say the same things, and to me it's like a cancer. If we don't pay attention to the statistics and deal with where the cancer is, there's always going to be a drag on the economy. So who are we going to invest in, and what is our leadership going to do about it? When I heard about Denver, one of the thoughts came to mind for me is that the Denver's mayor is an ex Urban League CEO at the Denver Urban League. And so I know that he had a experience of working with a constituency that's usually left behind and tried to be more inclusive with them as he rose to be the mayor. So, what is our leadership going to invest in? Are you going to invest in organizations who work with these communities, or are we always going to have to fight and struggle to get the type of resources we need to help these folk, be able to have decent, livable wage jobs or businesses? We're going to have to be honest about it, because we talk about diversity and inclusion, but at the end of the day, the statistics always stay the same or get worse. So my thing is, if you're gonna state that you're gonna do something, you can't always keep giving the same resources to the same folks. Yeah, they do well. They get the resources all the time. That's why they do well. But you're gonna have to start investing in some of these groups who work with the constituencies who are left behind.
Thank you, Fred. Priority in investment in those who are disadvantaged, important. Thank you. John Paturas.
I guess maybe I want to tackle, Fred, a little bit of your question of who are we going to invest in. One perspective and one view from our foundation as a funder is to support a growing and a robust economy. I'm really convinced, we're really convinced that we have to invest in the children of our community at the youngest of ages as possible, and ultimately throughout their educational careers. And as I look out and I see Russ Pry and our proud association with the county's First Things First initiative, Darren Weimer and the Summit Education Initiative that Emily mentioned briefly that was up on one of the slides, the kind of information and data that is now being collected for this community about young people and academic achievement, who's doing what, who's doing it successfully, and how ultimately we're going to be able to replicate that, not only in the city of Akron, but throughout all of Summit County, and then ultimately make decisions of where will funders, not only the private foundations, the corporate foundations, the businesses, the public sector, how will everyone rally to make sure that the resources and the commitments that have to happen at each of those levels. Emily, you had said something that I wrote in the margin a little bit in the beginning of your presentation of don't tie education to a job strategy. I hope that's not the case. And I really believe that that investment to the youngest people in the community in helping them become better learners in school and throughout life are ultimately going to help to deal and solve some of these problems that we're finding in the communities.
Investment in the rising generation. Thank you. James Thompson.
Okay, so I'm going to take a couple of different points here that have been raised. One is universal preschool education. I think that's a must. Economists have documented that that is the highest valued investment. The greatest return we get on investment is through the education of the very youngest children. For the region, I think we need to get out of the way. We need to reform the tax system. So it's a business-friendly tax environment. We need to reform regulations. So many of them are not necessary. Many of them are legacy type things that raise the cost of doing business. Not with necessarily the idea of retrofitting the industrial structure that's in place, which does need to be done, but to encourage new jobs, encourage new companies to arise. If there was this misconception that small businesses create most of the jobs. Not on net, it's young businesses. Young businesses create most of the job. This is where a lot of the innovation is going to come from. This is where the job growth is going to come from. And we need to have an environment that nurtures these and doesn't get in their way.
Thank you, James. Paul.
Thank you. First, I want to thank the University of Akron and the fund for both this session and inviting me to be a part of it. And second, I wouldn't be an official at the Federal Reserve Bank if I didn't preface my remarks by saying my comments here today are those mine only and not those of the Federal Reserve Bank
So
of
noted.
Cleveland and the Federal Reserve System. No. In terms of strategic actions, I guess I would state that this meeting is a good start. We have seen from research on resilient older industrial cities out of the Boston Fed that there are two factors that are very important: leadership and collaboration. And I think this isn't with data, but our experience has been that you have folks that are involved in community development in the true sense of community development, whether that's housing, neighborhood action, and you have folks that are involved in economic development, which is attracting businesses and jobs, chambers of commerce, those types of organizations. And historically, they haven't worked well, if at all, together. And I think for a community to be strategic in addressing both the challenges that were touched upon by the panel as well as the opportunities, collaboration is going to be very important. And I think this is an excellent first step. I would close by saying I had the opportunity to attend the Canton meeting as well as the Youngstown meeting, and it struck me, I'm a resident of Stark County, it struck me that there are regional or community differences, and I'm sure Akron has differences as well. So it appeared to me that Youngstown was much more ready to have this collaboration and discussion on priorities and actions than Stark County, Stark and Carroll County. There still was a balkanization, if you will, in Stark County where there was going to have to be a lot of work to bring the appropriate leaders together, where Youngstown, Warren, Youngstown area, those leaders have already been talking about an economic development strategy that fits into the regional economic development strategy. So it seemed to me that they were a little bit further along. But it's going to be hard work, and collaboration to me is the key. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. Before we leave this strategic actions with the focus on action, I can't help but note Ed Morrison being here, who's kind of focused on a phrase called strategic doing. The notion of don't wait to plan and do at the same time and keep moving, and I think that's an important part of what we're doing. But any questions from those in attendance on this particular topic before we jump into the next? Please state your name, who you're with, and thanks to Karen and Deb for jumping up and helping with the phones, or with the microphones.
Hi, good morning. My name is Joe McDonald. I'm actually one of the program managers with the Northeast Ohio Sustainable Communities Consortium, or NEOSCC. The third gentleman from the left, Jay?
Yes.
Yes, you made a comment about transportation, accessibility to jobs, and how in Northeast Ohio, if people have cars, then they can get to the jobs. But there's a key element, and that's affordability. And it is an issue in Northeast Ohio with housing and transportation costs when they're combined to think about what's truly affordable to people. You may have access to a car, you may be robbing another part of the budget just to make that transportation trek to get to the job that you need to pay for the car and your other costs. And when we look at the Center for Neighborhood Technology data on housing plus transportation affordability, we have a real issue in Northeast Ohio because of the disconnect we experience here between jobs and housing. So it's not about just having access to a vehicle, it's about being able to afford. And I think we need to really focus on how critical it is to bring jobs and housing closer together so that we can make this region truly affordable to everyone, and not just talk about having access to the actual vehicle itself. Cost and affordability are really key.
No, your point's well made, and I didn't mean it really in that context. There is a fact, though, that today of our 2 million workers, 40% work in a different county in which they live. That points to the opportunity that you're highlighting. It's 750, almost 800,000 of our workers work in a different county than which they live. So that is how we're set up today. The opportunity is to improve that, to bring jobs closer to where people are.
Thank you. Well, another comment before we jump in? Okay, let's press on. Okay, our next topic has to do with the stakeholders and the alignment of the stakeholders. And are we capturing who the appropriate stakeholders are? And what can we do to make sure that their visions and their actions are aligned? And let's just open it up in general. Let's go ahead and let the discussants go ahead and jump in on this particular topic.
Well, I'll start. Again, the research out of Boston that I referenced on these older industrial cities, the stakeholders or the organizations or the individuals that were reviewed as part of that work differed from community to community, but it tended to be broader rather than narrower. It tended to, again, marry the traditional community development with economic development. The organization of those stakeholders to a degree began to become organic on its own, and really began to look beyond, as was mentioned by others on the panel, either geographic or legal boundaries. So they began to think of their community, and I use that word specifically, not as a city or a township or a school system or a chamber of commerce or a business, but as a community, as a collective. So I'm not sure that there is a rule of thumb as to who to have at the table, but I think the start would be broader rather than narrower.
Thank you.
Brad, you also mentioned earlier, I don't know whether you were talking just about the fund, but this whole issue of who's in charge. As stakeholders, that could be incredibly difficult sometimes. I mean, we all come and represent different constituents where the resources and the investment and the money may come from. For us, it's more broadly by the whole list and host of donors historically and currently from the community. For corporate funders, it's different. For private foundations, it's different. But the ability to rally as we have on issues regarding hunger or education or in other ways in the community that we have rallied, I think it takes a lot of putting egos at doors before you come in, and we all recognize that's very, very difficult to do sometimes. Each of us are driven by different missions and visions and objectives for our own organizations. Some that have budgets that we all have budgets that we have to balance and we have to make ends meet. We have to look at the value and the return on the things we're doing and the things we have to recognize we simply can't do anymore. And I think where we sometimes break down is when you come to that door, you have to be willing and able to make a commitment about the investment that you're able to make, why you're really there, and that value that you bring, and then ultimately be able to put aside those differences that we might have to come to some resolution on solving very difficult problems.
Thank you.
You know, I'd like to support those comments and the fact that also out of Boston was the Boston Foundation report. And after the last 10 years, one of the things early on that they saw was that there were stakeholders with a common purpose, but they did not have the intertwining to work together. And that has been mitigated over time. And as the chairman of the Regional Prosperity Initiative, we see this as we work with the different agencies that have an effect on Ohio and northeastern Ohio, is that there isn't necessarily a common mission. It's understood, there's a handshake and a nod, but just like between communities, and once again, I'll speak about Hudson versus our neighbors, is that we have a mission for Hudson, and how much we can reach out and partner is sort of convoluted in many respects because there's not necessarily an agreement outside of the dashboard that the fund puts out of what we are doing as a region and how all communities should strive for that as well as protect within their confines. And when you talk about true collaboration, that really does protect the sanctity of local governance versus any other method. So it's best that we are collaborating at a higher level. But again, what is the overall central theme here? We see that even with the presentation of what matters to metros, there's a Canton presentation, which there should be. There's a Youngstown presentation. There's a Cleveland-Cuyahoga County presentation. There's an Akron Metro, as well as Lorraine and Elyria on the peripherals. And how do we bring those together? And I think that central area, so that we can enhance truly inclusion, is so critical.
Wayne,
Barry.
if I could, let me build on the theme that I raised before. And first, I'll call out Paul Corson, who's here. Paul came to Ohio from the EDA, and Paul is leading an effort to use the Lorain County Community College Economic Development Programs as a national model. Because of Paul, I had the opportunity to meet with some people from Long Beach State Community College. If I bring that meeting to this panel, they were blown away with all of the collaboration and all of the support and all of the infrastructure. And the fund had some beautiful slides of all of the activities that we have in Northeast Ohio that they don't have in Long Beach. Just blown away. So everyone here represents a community action organization. Everyone here is doing an outstanding job. But if you add up all of the efforts, the outstanding efforts that don't exist in Long Beach, but if you add them all up, we're still performing below the national average. It's incredible. How is that possible? So I would say, Wayne, we need to do something different. Doing what we're doing and doing it better, I don't think is going to bring us to a top tier. We want to be better than the national average. Half of communities are better than the national average. That's statistics. So I don't want to be better than the national average. I want to be number one, maybe not number one, but top 10%. And continuing all of the great work that's going on here in our communities, my thesis is not going to do it. So we have to change. Now, if I come back to what I said earlier, and Wayne used the term stakeholders. Now, I'm not sure what stakeholders are, but I sure have learned what customers are. So in my thesis, my point is, can you imagine that we're going to call stakeholders and customers, we're going to blur that concept, and we're going to say that customers are those people who create jobs. I work with the Research Foundation. Every once in a while we hire a student intern, but that doesn't have a big impact. who are the people in our communities that create jobs? And jobs for diverse populations, jobs for younger people, older, more educated people, but who are the people? And if I ask for a show of hands, and I ask people, when was the last time you talked to a customer? Someone who's creating a job, and found out from that customer, what do we need to do that we're not doing today to satisfy your opportunities to grow so we can create jobs here in Northeast Ohio? So again, I'll come back to the point. I call them our industrial companies. The folks in Arizona look to Ohio and say, you're so lucky, you have all these companies. But my point, Wayne, is we need to do a better job of engaging the community that creates the jobs to find out what their needs are and damn well serve those needs from all of the organizations that we already have established.
Okay, and I'll be a little
I'm
flippant
gonna
here
jump in.
and say how, because I
Can I
know
jump in
Barry
real
can
quick?
answer that. Go ahead, Fred.
I do feel that when you talk about stakeholders, it comes down to, who do you value and what different sectors do you value? Now, by and large, what I've seen here in Akron, there's no question there's a lot of collaboration, and I think there's some modeling of stuff here in Akron that can go forward for Northeast Ohio. No question about it, because I had an experience in Lorain County, Ohio for 9 years, that the two communities are just, Akron just leaps and bounds ahead of when you start talking about diversity, inclusion, and collaboration. But it's who do you value, to be at the table. Some people value folks who may not have the same sort of resources as others. Now, I see our county executive here. I feel strongly that the county executive values the Urban League. He's one of the people who calls me or always is saying, can you serve on this, or can you be at this table or on that table? Some other folks, I don't quite feel. It's like, well, all the Urban League gonna do is have his hand out. But see, it comes down to who you value as stakeholders in the community. And every stakeholder is not gonna have the same resources as some of the others do. So that's my 2 cents on that.
Thank you. Any other thoughts from the discussants? Okay, let's open it up to some comments and thoughts relative to stakeholders and alignment. Please, microphone and state name and your question and your affiliation.
John Begala, Center for Community Solutions. To the question of who's in charge, there's a lot being done with regard to alignment in the public sector, public policy, as a gentleman mentioned, and the civic sector. But we don't have a planned economy. We have a mixed market economy. And so how does all of this go about leveraging an alignment with private decisions that are made by private companies in the private sector? There are 3 sectors that seem to have an inordinate influence: banks, public utilities, which aren't, but whose decisions about where they put power lines end up moving people further and further from urban cores and that sort of thing. And increasingly hospitals who, but for the hospitals in this region, we wouldn't have any job growth. So how do those and perhaps others, how do we make the connections between this civic stuff that we're all here to talk about and to get to your point, the customers, the people who are creating jobs, but not in conversations like this?
Thank you. Any discussants want to react to that excellent point? Okay, other thoughts, comments? Go ahead.
Well, I want to respond to that because I think John is right. There are different conversations going on. I was just reading in the Columbus Dispatch last week where there was a communique that went out to the top 130 companies in Ohio from the administration. And the question was very specific. What do you need us to focus on in the future so that we target our expenditures to assist with advancing the economy here in Ohio. What are the job talents? Now, people who do surveys were very happy that 50% returned some comments, some more detailed than others. The governor was upset. He said, that's not enough. We hear about not targeting job advancement, and Derry, maybe you have more on that, targeting our money for participation and placement. But if they're not going to, this is a direct outreach, if they're not going to get back to us, then how are we supposed to know? Now, maybe they just don't know. But I think getting back and saying, we don't know, we're not sure, would be appropriate. And I think John makes a very good point. Everybody has to be in this. Everybody's a stakeholder, be it private or public side.
I think around the area of entrepreneurship, and when you start talking about minority businesses and diverse businesses, that I do strongly believe that companies and those who have major type of resources that want to invest, to me, can help invest in some of these up-and-coming companies to get them to a level and bring them up to a scale that then they can provide services and goods for particular bigger corporations like First Energy and the banks and the other corporations around town. I think there needs to be a willingness to invest in these smaller startups and diverse businesses to get them to a level, because if you only continue to give to those who have some sort of wherewithal or capacity, then we're just never going to get to a level where it's kind of all boats rise. So I do think that these corporations need to invest more to help other up-and-coming entrepreneurs be successful.
Yeah, I'll try to address your question by addressing the comment from the illustrious mayor to my left. Surveys won't do it, in my opinion. If the leadership, the economic development leadership, concludes that getting feedback, learning about what I'll call market needs is important, surveys won't do it. The folks who believe in getting that feedback need to have face-to-face meetings with the important stakeholders in the state. My opinion is you start out by creating what I'm going to call, what's the value proposition of Northeast Ohio? What is it that we offer stakeholders or customers a competitive advantage to grow their business, to grow high-paying jobs in Ohio, and then go out and visit lots of stakeholders and customers face-to-face to validate or not that the value proposition is appropriate, fine-tune it, and then develop collaborative action plans with those stakeholders to grow and create the jobs. But face-to-face contact, I think, is what I would advocate.
I'd love to jump.
I concur.
Let me just add that I think you're absolutely right. We've got to increase our contact with the businesses here. I'm in business attraction. I spend a lot of time outside the region talking to companies about the value proposition for Northeast Ohio. It's very compelling. We're able to make a lot of progress. But at the end of the day, I know, and those companies know, that it's the companies here that have to grow. And they're the biggest job creators. 90% of the jobs of the future are going to come out of the companies that are inside the region today. So we've got to be in touch with them. We need to go in and talk to them. We need to understand, what do you need to grow? And that's code for what's in your way, and how do we get it out of your way? Because we know that companies have 4 things they're trying to do. 1, they're trying to increase revenues. They're trying to minimize costs. They're trying to increase productivity, and they're trying to take the risk out.
So should we quit talking in code and simply go in and ask what's in your way?
Yes.
Right, great.
John, one more point. When you mentioned two of the three, when you mentioned the banks and you mentioned the utilities, and I know although we were talking about stakeholders, the word shareholders came to my mind, obviously. Is a certain, does economic polarization matter to shareholders? Does it? It matters to all of us. We wouldn't certainly not be here if not. But when I think about the kind of investment that is being made or has to be made in the community, how will we know when we are ultimately successful? What will that line look like? And one of the gentlemen mentioned that, when we're compared to other cities in Ohio, is that a good thing? If we're compared to Columbus, is that a great thing? If we're compared to half of the nation, is that a positive thing? What will we ultimately recognize when we get there to say this is an acceptable number, not only to the stakeholders, but to the shareholders of businesses, those folks that do invest, because I got to imagine that for any of those places, a healthier community, a safer community, all of those buzz things for quality of life that makes this a better place to do business will matter for their profitability and ultimately the money that they can then reinvest in the community. But I am curious, what will that end line look like that we will say we have achieved a level that was important to have been achieved in the community?
Any other thoughts? Okay, let's go. Our gentleman over left, name and affiliation and question and the microphone.
Jonathan Hollifield, Nortec. And I would like to respond to the challenge that we do something differently and build off of Paul and Fred's points, and actually the gentleman next to Fred, about education and long-term sustainability of our region. Of course, we know there are incumbent things that we have to do right away. It's not a matter of education will not create jobs. Let's look at job-creating education. Secondly, Emily was sort of exasperated and said, we need more. Well, there's two ways to get more: grow it and attract it. We seem to have a significant effort around attracting it. I'd question the effort we have about growing it long term. And finally, few organizations in our communities have the ability to affirmatively set and execute their own agenda. We are ultimately responding to regional, state, and to some degree national policy. And the absence of policy around inclusion, particularly where our regional puck is going, is absolutely devastating and undermines the long-term competitiveness of our region. Perhaps we can do things differently, is bridging the gap between traditional community and economic innovation, regional economic development. I'm still not clear what the difference is between the four.
Thoughts, responses?
Amen.
Okay, Dan Quigg, microphone. There's Karen.
Hi, Dan Quigg, Public Insight Corp. The mayor mentioned we're developing a site, 360 Public. Just finished the year with the Leadership Cleveland class of 2013, and we just finished our trip to Nashville, went with Tom Walter Meyer. It was interesting, and I'd like to just get the panel's view of alignment, because we really hit that. We visited an accelerator in Nashville that they really were proud of. It could accommodate 20 businesses. I look at the assets we have in Northeast Ohio, and if we align those, would be about 100 times that, probably more. So I just curious as to the panel's view on how we best align all these assets, because I think we have a lot of assets. I know Barry is well aware of this from Archangels and all this stuff, but it just seems like it's not as perfectly in sync. We have the Jump Starts of the world, Youngstown Business Accelerator, Incubator, but they're not perfectly aligned. And we would blow Nashville out of the water if we kind of aligned.
So specifics on how to better align.
How to better align.
Great. Let's tackle it. Pause.
It starts with
Emily, go ahead. Emily, let's have a thought here. a microphone, or you can step up to one of these. There we go.
I can project.
No, it's right next to you. Deb's on your left.
I don't need to. Thanks,
Okay.
Deb. I was going to say, just looking at the agenda, I saw the next question when this one was asked, and I think common metrics are absolutely key. I think once mayors and counties and the region understands what realistic job growth looks like, or realistic GDP growth, or realistic inclusiveness, or job force connectedness, once we understand those things, then we can better understand our role as stakeholders and institutions into building up to those goals.
Thank you. Jay, Brad, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say that I think there is an effort to try to get that sort of alignment underway right now. And, you know, I when asked for analogies for the regional system, I say it's a lot like an internal combustion engine. It is going somewhere, it's just not going that efficiently right now. And so, you know, we are moving ahead, but we have things to do. So inside the fund, when we make our grant dollars, we specifically tie that to the alignment of the organization. So at Jumpstart, we'll need to talk about its interaction with the network with whom it works, similarly with Team Northeast Ohio and elsewhere. And then that's the spirit. You may have been hearing about this regional economic competitiveness strategy. And again, the spirit of that as well is, can we get alignment among the business sector, the philanthropic sector, the civic sector, around the investments that it's making. And again, it's not efficient, but it is headed in that direction. If we think about the dream that we see, is that we recognize that 80% of the action, maybe 90% of the action, is at the local level. But the question is, can we have local strategies that then connect well with regional strategies? And in some places of the region, I don't recall, Paul, I think it was you said, in the Valley right now, they are intentionally pursuing a strategy that says, what are our priorities in the Mahoning Valley, and then what will be our strategy to leverage regional assets to advance that strategy. Wayne County has been doing that for a number of years, and Lorain County is just on the cusp of doing that as well. And so I think too often in our communities, we think about, well, I'm not for regional because I believe in local, which, as I hear it, almost sounds nonsensical, because we know that the bedrock of everything that happens is local, but why on earth wouldn't you try to connect and leverage the regional assets that we have? And so the dream I'd like to see is that we had a series of local strategies, but each had some reference to how it's leveraging regional assets.
Thank you.
You know,
Go ahead, Fred.
I think that there are other examples in the country that we can look at and buy into and try to model. I know I'm serving on the Akron Chamber's Board of Directors, and they selected Omaha, Nebraska to go visit this year in September, a city that I know a lot about because I served there for 13 years. I went there in 1989 and served there until 2002, till I came to Ohio. And when I look at Omaha from 1989 to where it is now, and I'm not, I don't have the type of history with Akron, but I know there's been some growth in Akron, but there's been tremendous growth in Omaha. And I just watched how they took on expanding economic development in that city from the core, out to the suburbs. And I know one of the strategies for them in Lincoln, Nebraska, is to become more of a sort of a dual region. So I think it's things that we can learn from other metropolitan areas in the country. But when things are clear and they are identified, then we have to make the alignments to move on them, and not just give it lip service, because I've seen a lot of that too. So you know, in aligning things, I think that there are definitely other metropolitan areas that we can learn from.
Thank you. I'm going to exercise some prerogative here as a facilitator. So we have a few minutes on metrics. Deb, we have, oh, go ahead. One more,
All right.
please.
Amanda Woodrum, Policy Matters, Ohio. There's a growing trend that young professionals want to move to vibrant communities with access to walkable neighborhoods and public transit. And increasingly, it is likely that companies that want to attract these young professionals will have to be located in places where, in these kinds of communities. And I'm wondering if the panel can address those trends.
Well, let me just say I'm from New York City, and in the last 30 days I spent a week in Boston and a week in New York City. They are not models that we should try to emulate. I'll come back to my point at the beginning. We are who we are. We do have strengths in Northeast Ohio. You know, public transportation is not what it is in New York City, but riding a subway train for an hour to get to work, or God forbid, driving to Midtown Manhattan to try. We have advantages, and I think we need to build on those advantages, and we cannot be all things to all people. So, yeah, I agree that those mobile young professionals who want to live in New York City or Boston or San Francisco will. We'll never be New York City, Boston, or San Francisco. But if you want to raise a family, I would not encourage you to go to New York City, Boston, or San Francisco. I'd encourage you to stay in Northeast Ohio.
Okay, one more comment from Jay on this topic.
Well, I'll just say that we deal with about 100 projects a year that we get pretty involved in. And there is a very growing interest in urban centers. And the great thing about Northeast Ohio is we have multiple urban centers, and we have some good ones, some really good ones, and they're becoming more and more attractive to the companies. Every day I get, these opportunities that come our way, and anything that involves a workforce in the 21 to 35 range, 9 times out of 10, there's an interest in how can we be in a vibrant part of the community where, all of these after-work resources are available, connectivity, transportation, housing, affordability, walkability. Big part of our response is in that area.
Okay, we're going to cheat and have one more. Paul, go ahead.
Thank you. I just, and this is an obvious statement, take it for what it's worth, but the generational preferences, it's like the market, it's going to move. But I think the success has been seen in those communities that take some steps or strong steps to realize that market and enable it and work with that generation so that they can have it. So, I mean, it's not just going to happen because young folks want to live in cities. It needs to be supported. It needs to have some, I don't want to say structure, but it needs to have some thought and plans around it.
Great. Okay, let's shift to metrics. Metrics in the era of big data, and how what metrics should we be using to determine economic progress? And we'll open it up to the discussants to jump in on this one also. Everybody loves metrics, I can see.
All right, so I'll jump in. There's
Thanks, James.
a few that I think you want to focus on. Study a few years back by the Cleveland Fed where they looked at innovation, and one of the things they use that seems related is patent applications. So we want to see how much new technology or process we're making. I would look at business starts, so I'd throw out retail, since about 70% of new business starts are restaurants, which 72% seem to fail. And I look at the average education of the workforce population, which is an area that Ohio's been lagging behind. What is the average educational attainment for the types of jobs that we think we want, from the retrofitting of the infrastructure, which is requiring higher skilled labor force, to the entrepreneurship. We all know all that's related to the educational attainment of the population.
in this era of big data, so much data, do we need greater granularity in our metrics? But anyway, let's go ahead with the general metrics. Anyone that wants to jump in?
My comment would be Brad. He's writing. We need metrics. I think metrics will unify and allow us to measure progress. I don't think it's critical one metric versus another. What we need are half a dozen metrics, and I would look to the fund for developing and publishing that straw man. But I don't think we have to invent economic indicators. They exist, but I don't think they are being used as a unifying tool to measure progress, to adjust, to identify barriers and bust them, and monitor progress.
Clayton Christensen out of Harvard gives some wonderful presentations on making sure we're asking the right questions. And so the metrics are really the measurements of those questions. We need to really be focused on that. Mayor Curran?
Yes, thank you very much. Yes, big data has been a big topic for especially the last couple of years, and even recently was the cover on Harvard Business Magazine as the advent of data scientists. And one of the things that we try to do as elected officials, be it at the county level, be it at the local level, is to make sure that we are testing our legislation, policies against what the current trends are, and that's only allowable by data. But I want to go a little bit beyond that. Data is abundant, but analytics is the key to the data. And as Emily showed us in her presentation, which is startling, absolutely startling, that those areas with the fastest and the largest job growth overwhelmingly have a likewise increase of crime and poverty and disparity. Am I correct in that? Is that what you said? So as we move forward, we have to be very careful, because we will, as my mother used to say, bite off our nose to spite our face as we move forward without the analytics of how best to approach it. So I think it's critically important. And as the world moves today, having an experience of some management experience or legislative experience 10, 15 years ago is almost inconsequential. You have to have the data, what the trends are today, in order to truly stay ahead of the curve, but you have to have the analytics, and that is really important.
Well, I think definitely we need metrics. It's already been spoken to, the importance of alignment, and we're going to get alignment if we have common metrics. It's critical. To me, we have to make sure we're picking the right ones. I think, again, in the past, we've tended to rely on one or two. Don't know that we looked for the right kind of interdependence on those metrics to tell us the full story. So for, again, the driver industries, the legacy industries that we had here, from 1970 to 1987, our per capita income was growing. Yet, we weren't getting the job growth, we weren't getting the gross regional product growth, and we were losing share globally. So boom, we had a metric, we all felt good about it, but we got hit in the nose. So my sense is you got to have the right output metrics, and then you have to make sure you select the appropriate, what I call process metrics. These are the things that are sort of forecasters that you're going to end up in the right places.
Should not go away from what the truth in the data says.
Well, in any investor, funder, corporation, what's the return on the money and the resources that are being committed? It will drive and help to determine every future decision, every future investment that's going to be made. Emily, when we talked, when this presentation was done down in Canton, and I remember one of the first thing that we didn't talk about today, but when we look at the economic polarization, despite the growth in the economy. Well, someone there asked, what kind of jobs are there in those communities that are being filled, that are seeing growth? Are they part-time positions? Are they lower paid positions? Despite economic growth, they're not the kinds of incomes that would sustain people. I think the numbers set you free, and it's important to know them very deeply and closely.
I wouldn't be at the Federal Reserve if we didn't believe in numbers. But I'm not an economist, nor do I play one on TV, so I'm going to put a note of caution. Some of the things that, presented in the report, or that we collectively as a community might want to measure, those are hard things to move. So there needs to be some patience. But patience can't be, forgetfulness. So at some point, you have to do the analytics and tie things together. But it's not something that's going to move in a year or a quarter. It's going to take some time to change some of the educational statistics and other things.
Thank you. We have reached the designated hour. We'll take one quick comment from anyone on metrics. Please, Paul Corson, formerly with the U.S. Department of Commerce, EDA, and now with Lorain County Community College.
Thanks, Wayne. One thing that I'd like to see as an outsider having come in, there doesn't seem to be a lot of churn here. There's decline, and then there's bringing it back. But there's not a lot of churn. There's not a lot of churn in terms of immigrants. There's not a lot of churn in terms of, I think, new perspectives, new ideas. We do this well, and so we're gonna get it back. And for me as an outsider, everywhere I go around the country, the real vibrant communities are those that have that churn. They try new things, they empower new people. Even just, my softball team calls me Gramps, right? When I look around the room, I might be on the younger side of the demographic in here. So even that in terms of churning new ideas and new people and new things. And if there's a way to measure what we churn in Northeast Ohio, that would be really interesting to me.
As a former dairy farmer, I know something about churn, but how are you going to measure churn?
I look at things like, in my own neighborhood, right, there's been a huge uptick in the last year in terms of the houses that are for sale now versus what were for sale when I moved in. But when I talk to my neighbors, they all move 3 to 5 miles from where they grew up, right? So who are we selling the houses to? Are we getting new blood in? Are we getting new ideas, right? In terms of downtown, right? Somebody said to me, well, there's Ohio City, but I don't know that I'd ever go there. To me, that's one of the most vibrant and interesting communities in the region, right? When I first came to Cleveland 6 years ago, I could lay down and take a nap downtown, at 6 o'clock, and cities like Buffalo and Youngstown, places like, they're the same, right? You'd never get run over if you fell asleep in downtown area. So how do we get churned down there and see how to drive people and ideas, right? There's all kinds of things.
Thank you very much. A heartfelt thanks to the discussants and to all the discussants. Thank you for participating, and let's give them a round of applause. Okay, a couple more items. We're going to invite Jill Miller-Zyman, who's the director of the Partnership for the Civic Comments, to share a few remarks with us, and then we'll wrap up after that.
That's not the problem.
I would say good morning, except I see we're past noon, so it's not good morning anymore. But thank you all for being here. I'm just going to be brief. As I was introduced, my name is Jill Miller-Zyman, and I am Director of Partnerships at the Civic Commons. I've worked with several people here in the audience through the Efficient Gov Network, which is a project that's been supported by the Fund for Our Economic Future for several years now. It started out as a Fish and Gov now, so it's really exciting to see so many people here. This is my first time hearing this, although I've looked at the report and the Civic Commons has been involved for a while, and there's a lot there. So because there's so much there and we've got so many people here who are engaged, we've got a platform on the Civic Commons specifically for being able to continue the conversation and answer perhaps some of the questions and get some answers from those people Barry talked about trying to engage in regard to some of the questions that were raised. First, I'd just like to show you what it looks like. This is the landing page for the What Matters to Metros project. You can get to that by going to theciviccommons.com/what-matters. And what you can see here is where you can register. And to register, all you need to do is you can either register with a Facebook login, or you can sign up with an email and your name, and that's all you need. You will be faced with our mission and principles so you can understand what the expectations are. One of the things that we're known for is having civil debate and dialogue, where you can attack issues but not individuals. And we like to keep it that way, and it's been pretty successful for a while. This page shows you that when you scroll down after the introductory information about this project, you'll see these different conversation modules, and there is one that's already set up specifically related to the What Matters to Metros that's held here this morning in Akron. And once you've registered, you'll be able to go in there and start commenting, asking questions. You can also lurk, if you know what that means, which is you can just read and follow along without registering. But what we'd really love for you to be able to do is to reach out to your colleagues and your networks and some of those people you want to hear from and get them to engage with you in these conversations. Just from this morning, some of the things that I heard being talked about that are fabulous topics for this kind of online dialogue, which we call asynchronous, because you can come back to it at any time. It isn't something that you have to do instantly. Access to jobs, that was a topic that came up. We know that we've got the Opportunity Corridor project going on in Northeast Ohio, and a lot of the debate has been about not just how to spend the money that's going to be spent on that, but what is this going to do in terms of the access for jobs that already exist. That's a topic that's been discussed on the Civic Commons, and certainly is something I think we're all going to be hearing about and talking about a lot more. Another one was policy and programs around diversity, and what does diversity mean in terms of the metrics and the topics that fall under the What Matters to Metros report. And then the last thing that I heard today, again, referring to Barry, who I don't know, but I was really pleased to hear him talk about engagement, and actually a very grassroots level engagement of being able to hear what people need, listening to those needs, and then trying to craft policies and implementing policies that actually meet with those needs. So again, very rich topics for dialogue. This is a way to continue it. It's wonderful to have so many people come to face, and we don't ever consider this to be a substitute for these kinds of gatherings, but we do think that this is a wonderful way to expand and extend the reach of being able to talk about these and engage more people in these conversations, so we can really feel good about the stakeholders who we've heard from and what we've learned. So that's pretty much all that I have for you today. You can reach us at theciviccommons.com. My email is jillmziman@theciviccommons.com if you have any questions. We have feedback tools on the site. If you get there and you're not really sure what to do, just click feedback and we can help you out. But again, I would urge you to take a look at this landing page and the different information that's there. We have links to the report as well, so you can read that. And please sign up and keep talking. Thank you.
Thank you, Jill. As we wrap up, just a couple of thoughts. Brad Whitehead mentioned at the beginning the fact that we do not live in a system where there is a CEO that oversees the efforts of Northeast Ohio. And although at times I think it would be nice to have a benevolent dictator that manages and coordinates all these things with enough authority to make it happen in a rational way, we are blessed with another system that's more market-based that allows us to come together. But for that to work, it really requires some significant collaboration. That spirit of collaboration, and not only a willingness to do it, but actually doing the doing, as the strategic doing, if you will, of making that collaboration work. And sometimes that collaboration is going to require us to restructure some of our organizations so that we can be more productive and more proficient. And I think that needs to be part of the discussion with collaboration. Also, as we have this discussion today, we want to make sure that we're learning from those who have gone before us, or more importantly, those who are going with us. A few months ago, we had the Boston Foundation here with their Indicators Project, a great learning opportunity for us. And there's a couple points that came out of that session, I think, that merit mentioned today. One is the value of cutting-edge research. And this is not only technology research, but research in terms of the ecosystems. And the collecting of that and making it usable for, we're using the word stakeholders, but for all of us within the community. The second is these research results really need to be made available, released to the public, and I think we need to be proactive in making sure that happens. So much of this depends on educating the citizenry, and particularly the rising generation. The last point that came out of the Boston Foundation is that we need to form coalitions. We often talk about coalitions of experts. And yes, we would agree with that, but we also want coalitions of doers, those who can come together and take that data and make it happen, particularly coming from different fields, those who are representing different constituencies. And actually, there's a fourth point, and that is we need to make sure that there's media coverage to make sure that they are not only involved, but the information is getting to all. So our goal is to work together to come up with, we talk about strategic plans. We want to further the strategic planning, but we really want to develop some strategic action that addresses many of these issues. So we thank you for coming, for your participation, for those who have presented. For those of you who are staying for the afternoon session, we are convening essentially a subgroup that involves those who have particularly been involved with data and at various levels, and we want to see if we can do a better job of bringing the data people together, sharing data, using that data to our collective benefit. So we have a box lunch, or there will be a box lunch. Holly, I think that's coming in, okay. And there are going to be some extra lunches, so we would welcome any of you that did not necessarily sign up for that. You are welcome to stay and listen in for all or part of that on the data session. So again, thank you very much and have a wonderful day.